Next, we're going to carry out our next logical step, which is going to be implementing our solution or escalating. So not much here other than just carrying out our steps for our solution. So there's not much here because pretty much everything rest to do is dependent on what type of solutions that you have to carry out. Just make sure that before you make any major changes that you're backing up your data, that you're backing up your configurations and your settings in case you need to go back to them, and you're documenting everything that you're doing in case you need to start rolling back or you need to escalate an issue. So that's pretty much it. Or if we need to escalate, if you don't have the privileges or you don't have the knowledge to perform certain steps, then you may need to escalate your issue. So at this step, we're either implementing our solution that we have our fill in the blank, choose your own story video here, or you get to implement whatever solution you come up with, or if you need to, then escalate your solution. After we have implemented our solution or we've escalated and we're following up later with our same client, then we're going to want to verify functionality and perform preventative measures. Now, when we're verifying functionality, we're not only verifying that the original issue is fixed, but we're also verifying that no new issues have come up. This involves being able to talk to our clients and have a good relationship with them, essentially. Being able to talk with them and say, okay, so I've fixed your computer, I've made sure that everything that from the original issue I can do, I've checked out a couple settings here and there, and I don't see any new issues, but why don't you follow up with me in a couple hours or in a day or two and make sure that you don't see anything different. Now, if you have a if you have the type of doctor-patient relationship, almost computer guy user relationship, almost, where they put in a ticket, you pick up the ticket, you send them an email and say, I received your ticket, when can I come by to troubleshoot? And then you go by, you fix the issue, and you leave, then you're going to have the issues fixed, you're going to have a lot of tickets, but 2 days later you're going to get 5 more tickets because of 5 new issues. Or 2 or 3 weeks later, you're going to have 1 major issue because this person feels like, well, it seems like they don't really want to help me, they just want to fix the ticket. Which may be true, but you still want to be able to have a good relationship with the users, because then they'll be able to send you an email and they'll say, hey, you fixed the issue, but I noticed there was something a little bit weird here, or there was a setting that didn't seem quite right here. And you can check it out, and you can either calm their fears, or you can say, oh, actually, that is a good point. Let me see if I can check that and cut off another major issue which may come on down later down the road. Now, we're not saying that we want you to have 100 users in your environment that feel like they're on a personal relationship with you, that they can call you up every time their computer freezes for half a moment. You do want to establish some guidelines and say, okay, you do need to submit a ticket, but I will work with you, and you'll be able to communicate with me, and we'll be able to solve this issue together. But you don't want to have a completely open door policy, especially if you're in a very, very large enterprise environment where you can't have an open door policy with 2,000 users. So you really need to understand your own environment, you need to understand your own work structure, and you need to understand your particular companies or your actual positions, methods and policies as far as how customers are supposed to contact IT professionals, if they're supposed to submit tickets, and how they're supposed to submit tickets through. If you're a tier 2 desktop support and they need to go through the first tier in order to get to you, there's a reason for that. It's not just to inconvenience a user, but it's to make sure that there's a documented path of issues being fixed, and it's also in place so that tier 1 can help cut off some of the issues, so that tier 2, the desktop support, isn't constantly flooded with minor issues like needing to restart a computer or plug in a USB device. So there's a reason for policies, there's reasons for standard operating procedures. So just because you feel like, oh, hey, I could help this person more by letting them contact me directly, if it's against your standard operating procedures, don't do it. So we've verified that the original issue is fixed. We've communicated with our customer and we followed up and made sure that there's no new issues, but we still want to hold on to our configurations and our data. These configuration and data backups are going to be useful if 2 weeks down the road something does come up. So we want to hold on to those configurations and data so that we'll have them as backups for either maybe a week or two until we know that the issue is good, or maybe as long as our standard operating procedures allow. We may have standard operating procedures that allow us to back up configuration files and data as long as we're troubleshooting an issue, but as soon as the troubleshooting is finished and an issue is fixed, we're told that we have to delete that data in order for have confidentiality. Now, if we're working with confidential data, we don't want copies of that data all over the place and in places where we can't manage. Always make sure that before you back up those configurations and you back up that data, you're allowed to, and that it's standard operating procedure too. So we also want to perform preventative measures. Now, preventative measures include everything from locking settings so that users don't change them, to maybe making sure that cable connections stay good and verifying those cable connections every once in a while, to changing, regularly monitoring and changing devices such as switches and routers if necessary, upgrading firmware, upgrading patches. So essentially anything that might prevent that issue from recurring or preventing issues from coming up in the future that are preventable. There are certain settings that a typical user doesn't really need to have access to. It may help later. You may say, well, then I could just call them up and they could change this setting for me, and it prevent me from having to come out. Well, then you may want to implement a remote solution. But you don't want to have a lot of settings available to users that they don't really understand what they do. You may have a certain user that is never going to check anything. All they do is they come in, they open their email, they open their work, and they do what they need to do, and they leave. But then you have people that are a little curious and they're a little bit too nosy for their own good, and they say, oh, hey, my computer's acting up a little bit. Let me see if I think I saw something on the television once about how to open up control panel and fix my internet. And then you get there and they've made registry setting changes. So it's a very slippery slope to just allow users to have the permissions and have the ability to change all of their computer settings just because. You want to get those locked down. You want to have those configurations set either through a local policy or group policy settings, and you don't want to give. And again, you only want to give people least privilege. You want to give them the least amount of privileges, the least amount of permissions that they need to get their job done. And if they need more, then they'll request it. And they'll let you know if they need more privileges or they need more permissions. And if there's a certain form or a certain procedure they have to go through to request that, or if maybe you're a small shop and they contact you personally and say, hey, I need to install this font and I don't have the permissions to install this font. Maybe they only do that once every 2 months, install something, and you can keep them at a level where they don't have the permissions to. But maybe they do it once every other day, and then you might want to reevaluate whether or not you're going to give them those permissions. But keep them at a least privilege, lock down those settings and configurations, and you might prevent a lot of issues from happening that lead to bigger issues down the road. So we want to just verify our entire system functionality, verify that our original issue is solved and there's no new issues. Hold on to our backups and datas for a little while to make sure that we don't need them again, and we want to perform any preventative maintenance measures which we might see necessary in order to help the issue from recurring or to help from additional issues from happening in the future.